I'm sure I could take up all of the time on the tape to talk about my wonderful son, Stephen Fitzgerald Key. He is the eldest grandson of the late Elder Robert Lewis Sr. and Lucy Edna Ashton Key, the late Alma Deans. His grandmother is L. Rebecca Beelan Deans. His godparents are the Reverend and Mrs. Dr. Victor B. Phillips Sr. The night before Steve was born, his uncles and aunts were engaged in a game of Racco in our bedroom. Of course, I was winning as usual, and I was also doubled over with laughter. Well, 24 hours later, Steve was born. The entire Key family took over the waiting room at the hospital, and before I even knew that I had had a son, Steve had been presented to them. When Steve was 1 week old, his father, Robert Lewis Key Jr., known as Daddy, Bobby, and King Key, took him to the pediatrician for his first visit. I was still confined to bed. Daddy came home and reported that the physician, Dr. Walter Combs, said that Steve was a wise young fellow, and indeed he is wise. We were proud parents and relatives, and we were very protective. Steve was precious, loved, and given everything a child could need or want, and then some, but he was not spoiled. He was reared in a Christian home and brought to Third Street Church at 6 weeks for his christening. Outside of the home, and Steve was cared for by his grandmothers and a special aunt, Mrs. Evangeline Key Jenkins. Steve was never taken to a babysitter. He was also always obedient, respectful, kind, and charitable. At the age of 2, when he was being cared for by his grandmother, Mommy Lou, she collapsed in the kitchen one morning while Steve was sitting at his little table eating his daily cream of wheat sprinkled with sugar. His grandmother was found on the floor before lunchtime. Steve was still sitting at his little table, not moving because he had been trained to sit until he was instructed to move. Steve was an honor student who could always be found sitting quietly reading or playing with his Legos. He had no desire to be running around outside. He began playing the piano at age 2. His first piano teacher outside of the home was Mrs. Gwendolyn Jennifer, a classmate of mine. Steve was not interested in his lessons, but he wanted to play what he wanted to play. Mrs. Jennifer told me that he was wasting my time, her time, and my money. We stopped those lessons. Steve continued to teach himself to play the piano. After that, guitar lessons followed along with karate, and he could really kick. In fact, he got into trouble kicking at adults sometimes. He began playing the violin in the 4th grade, eventually becoming first chair in the DC Youth Orchestra, first chair clarinet in the high school marching band. Steve said he thought he could play any instrument there was. We know that Steve's musical idols are Edwin and Walter Hawkins and Richard Smallwood. Steve listened to their recordings and mastered them at the keyboard, all on his own. We never knew that Steve could sing until he was on a program one day at church. We learned that after school and before we would get home from work, Steve would play and sing up a storm. Steve eventually met and developed a friendship and working relationship with his musical idols. Steve's life has always had purpose and direction, with many achievements and accomplishments. It is an honor to be his mother and to speak of my love, devotion, and deep appreciation for such a wonderful son who every day shows me his respect and his appreciation for me.